Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the second ever Uplink for Space Rocks. And there we are. We are joined by Mark McCorcoran once again. Mark, how are you doing? What an absolute pleasure it is to have you here once again. Oh, we're going to wait for your audio to come on there. Let's try that again. Okay, in one. How are you, Mark?
I'm good. Yeah, very good. Thank you, Alex. Pleasure to see you again in your traditional place, floating in outer space.
Indeed, indeed. Well, it's always nice to be out in the nebula, you know, on a Friday, certainly, a long weekend. Indeed. How have you been? And were you up late last night?
You know what? I wasn't terribly, because I had a lot of work on this week. We had lots of video conferencing with this wonderful system, Zoom here. Lots of meetings discussing the future of European Space Agency science program, future missions, status of where things are at the moment with the various restrictions we're all operating under. And I was going to stay up if I hadn't been so tired, because as you know, very early this morning, we had a very interesting event for ESA, which was the flyby, the one and only flyby of our Bepi-Colombo mission. This is our mission that was launched in October 2018. And ultimately, it's going to go into orbit around Mercury in 2025. But in order to do that, it's got to do a whole bunch of gravitational assists, flybys, in order to effectively shed speed. It's got to slow down in order to get into orbit around Mercury. So this morning at local time here in the Netherlands, 6:25, Bepi-Colombo flew across the South Atlantic at about 1 Earth diameter away, so nearly 13,000 kilometers above the South Atlantic. And the gravity of the Earth then effectively allowed Bepi-Colombo to slow down by 5 kilometers per second. And that actually has redirected us now en route to Venus. And we'll have 2 of these flybys at Venus, one in October this year and one later next year. And after that, then we get to Mercury, and we have a whole sequence of 6 flybys at Mercury before we finally capture into orbit. So the good news is everything worked out absolutely fine today. There are some nice pictures online of Bepi-Colombo flying over the Earth, seeing the Earth underneath. And some people were lucky enough to be able to take pictures the other way, from the Earth, looking up and seeing Bepi-Colombo going across the sky. Very difficult here in Northern Europe because it was very close to the horizon. I would have, if I had gone to the beach and tried to see it, would have been 3 degrees above the horizon for me. So, and faint, not naked eye at all. We would have needed binoculars or a telescope. So I slept in and then looked at the pictures afterwards.
Indeed. Well, as will we all, I think, in the coming days. You know, a hugely momentous occasion, of course, and you know, incredibly well timed, given that we are actually going to do our second uplink to talk about huge milestones in the human exploration of space, certainly. And of course, we're going to ask you to very quickly tell people a bit about your Zoom background. Continuing theme.
Zoom background.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to bring Loretta Whitesides Hidalgo, the co-creator of Yuri Night, and Harriet Brettle, the coordinator for Yuri Night London and the co-chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council. And I think they're almost online. Hello, Loretta, Harriet. How are you guys doing?
Great, thank you. How are you guys doing?
We're good. We can judge everybody by their Zoom background, right? So Loretta, you just have the real universe behind you, and Harriet is playing Ellie Arroway.
I can't hear anything, just for the record.
Oh, can you not? Okay. Oh. Well, I think we'll keep on going. Harriet, can you hear us okay?
I can, loud and clear.
Okay.
Very good.
Loretta, can you not hear us at all? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. 1 second, I'm going to drop her a line. And Harriet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself then? What's your role with the Space Generation Advisory Council, the London Space Network? And well, I guess, how do you get involved with Yuri Night?
Yeah, sure thing. So I am the newly elected co-chair of the Space Generation Advisory Council, which is a non-profit organization that essentially supports students and young professionals connect to the wider space industry. We have over 15,000 members in 150 countries, and it's a fantastic way to meet like-minded space enthusiasts who are sharing that passion that they have for the space industry, but pursuing it in a whole variety of different ways. And that's one of the really exciting things that I think makes the space community quite special and unique. is that, you know, you can be a rocket scientist, you can be an engineer, you can be a lawyer, you can be a space lawyer, you know, you can work on the finance side, communications, I could go on, but there's a whole host of ways you can get involved in the space industry. And that's something that really excites me. So yeah, happy to be here.
Well, it's a massive thing. I guess while we're talking about Zoom backgrounds, tell us a bit about yours, because I got to say, in terms of seminal films and my favorite films of all time, not just because of the film, but also the book on which it's based and its author, I had to ask you, why did you choose that one?
Yeah, so Carl Sagan is probably my all-time hero, and Contact is probably my favorite book of all time. So this is a background of the scene where Ellie Arroway, who is the main character, first detects a message from outer space from some aliens. And if I move, you might be able to see her listening on her radio. But yeah, honestly, that was really the story that changed things for me. It's just so wonderful to see Carl's wonder of the universe come through and explore so many different facets of what, you know, a message from outer space might mean for humanity, not just on the science side, but the community aspect. You know, what would it mean for religion, all these different things, and it just blew my mind. So yeah, that's why it's there.
Indeed. Well, I guess we have no better person to talk about just, you know, what it all means, just like in a much broader sense than someone I think is responsible for bringing that joy to so many people. Loretta, I believe you can hear us now.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the show. You know, I suppose, you know, we topped off the show with a huge milestone in terms of the human exploration of space. Of course, you know, Bepi Colombo now on its way to Mercury, having just benefited from a gravity assist from Earth. And I guess it's a pretty great framework with which to discuss what Yuri's Night is all about. Now, take us back to the very beginning. Where did it all come from? Why'd you care so much?
It's great. Thanks, Alex. When I got out of college, I went down to Houston to NASA Johnson Space Center because, you know, been a space kid through and through my whole life. So it's almost like Mecca for me. So I was super excited to be there. And when I got there, on all the calendars at NASA, on April 12th, it said, first anniversary of the first space shuttle launch. And I thought, oh my God, that's so cool. I didn't, because my birthday is April 12th. And I was like, how did I get to be this old and not know that I was, you know, the shuttle anniversary and I share a birthday? This is really cool. And this was 1996. So it was, you know, at the end of the Cold War, the wall came down and there was an exhibition that came to Houston called First in Space, all about the Soviet space program. And I'd always been interested in the Soviet space program, although it was really secret when I was a kid. And I went in and had a huge opening banner that said Yuri Gagarin, first human in space, April 12th, 1961. And I was just like, get out, because the two anniversaries were 20 years apart to the day. And I thought, that's just too much of a cosmic coincidence. We have to show the power of space to bring the world together.
Indeed. Well, I guess, you know, from that perspective, I mean, you know, the thing about, I guess, you know, as someone, you know, who grew up in an American school system, for instance, and so on, is, you know, the beginning of human spaceflight, you know, is so frequently framed simply within the terms of the space race, you know, just, you know, people competing. And if I'm not mistaken, it sounds like what Yuri's Night is all about is making it an achievement on behalf of humanity, you know, something that we can all celebrate.
Yeah, we like to think that 10,000 years in the future, this is still going to be a milestone that our species remembers, you know, when the first of us left the home planet. And at that point, it'll be, you know, all of the current geopolitics will sort of be eclipsed by, you know, what we can do together. And so we wanted to sort of get that framework to this and celebrate not one superpower or the other, but all of us. And even Japan has a space anniversary on April 12th too. It's their first rocket they launched was the Pencil rocket was on April 12th. So, you know, just trying to make this something, a big tent for everyone to be a part of.
I should point out here that I'm the only person, I suspect, on this call here right now who was born before this happened. So yeah, just a couple of weeks beforehand. So I have not always been a child of the space age. There was a little bit right at the beginning. I was a tiny little baby where nobody had been into space, but the entirety of my life afterwards has been. You're all lucky. You've all been space kids since you were born, but some of us are old.
That's fantastic. Thank you for representing, Mark.
But one of the things that really interests me about the way that Yuri's Night is organized, you know, in celebration of the first human being in space, is that it's also very open source. It's very cooperative. I mean, in fact, that's how Space Rocks became involved with Yuri Night, was literally because, well, I mean, Harriet, got in touch to talk to us about what we could do to celebrate in London. Of course, it was disappointing that we couldn't celebrate at the Science Museum, this year. But it's part
We're here now, so it's all good.
big, and I suppose that, who better to speak with than someone from European Space Agency, of course, which represents 22 nations. Am I right, Mark?
That's right. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's certainly a wonderful statement on what we can do through human interconnection, certainly. But I mean, Loretta, I mean, I have to ask, and I hope you won't mind. I mean, of course, Yuri Night is far from the only thing that you've done. Where did your love of space begin, and what career highlights did that lead you to?
Oh, that's a great question. So, obviously, Star Wars had a big part in it, I think, as well as this book that I read when I was a kid, Our Universe by National Geographic. I used to play astronauts with my cousins under the stairs at their house, like the sort of little like Harry Potter sort of cupboard under the stairs was our spaceship. And so, I mean, I can remember being passionate about space for all the way back. And even in kindergarten, I have memories of, the teacher putting up astronaut on the bulletin board and maybe, and you could get your picture up there if you knew your alphabet. And I was like, oh, I want to get my picture up there. I want to be on the moon. So it's definitely goes all the way back. So, and then when I went into school, I decided I wanted to be an astrobiologist because I didn't want to work on just, I wanted to work on human exploration. And so I figured if I was doing biology, that would sort of only allow me to work on the human side of the program, which is the part I was most interested in. And so I was really looking at how do we create systems that can allow us to live off planet, grow our own food, recycle our air and water, all the things we need to live well on spaceship Earth as well. It's just great. And so, as part of that, I got to go to the Canadian Arctic with NASA and look at plant growth in extreme environments, study terraforming Mars with Dr. Chris McKay, who's extraordinary, and even dive to the bottom of the ocean with Hollywood director James Cameron to look at some of the extremophiles that live down there that could be analogs for European life or things like that.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's an incredible trajectory, certainly. And, I just, obviously, I love what Yuri Night represents because, of course, it's, brought us together, certainly. But I mean, so how did you meet Harriet? And Harriet, I mean, how did you figure into this? How did you guys become interconnected?
Gosh, Loretta, I can't remember. Oh, you know what? It was actually in a Yuri's Night. Actually, I think I remember. It was in Colorado, and I noticed Loretta was at this Yuri's Night event for it was a space industry conference, and I came up and I said hello, and I think I probably very awkwardly introduced myself, and I said I'm part of SGAC. I don't know if you've heard of it. And Loretta like looks at George and laughs, and it's like, oh, I was like involved in the beginning. And so we had this kind of that in common from the get-go, I guess. And I was lucky enough to spend a year over in California studying planetary science at Caltech. And Loretta was a fantastic kind of friend, mentor, supporter in terms of welcoming me to the LA space scene. I got to go to Yuri's Night in LA, which was just fantastic, and just seeing the energy and the community that Yuri's Night brings together, it was super inspiring. And so that was what we were hoping to recreate in London this year, but we will have to wait until next year to do something big in person.
Yuri's Night has, I'm not sure if it's necessarily from the beginning, but it is an international thing. So anybody can kind of sort of jump in and say, I would like to join, have a Yuri's Night event locally. I know some of the members of our scientific community and our industrial community, they've done Yuri's Night elsewhere in Europe. So there have been events. Would the one in the Science Museum have been the first one this year in the UK? I think there must have been some in the past, probably.
No. I mean, this is one of the things that's wonderful about Yuri's Night is, anyone can pick it up and run with it, which is great. So I know the British Interplanetary Society, for example, has organised a whole host of events, Yuri's Night events in the UK in the past. So yes, it's definitely not a new thing. Taking it to the Science Museum might have been a little new, but it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, our German delegation has asked us, one of the German delegates who works for DLR, the German Space Agency, they said to me, or at least a year ago, when they knew about Space Rocks, They said, you know, Space Rocks needs to come to Germany and be part of Yuri's Night. And so we've been asked several times, and it was, you know, it would have been great if we had done this one, which would have been a couple of weeks ago right now already, on the 25th of March. I think we were planning to do that because it lined up with the Science Museum's dates. But yeah, events overtook all of us, unfortunately. So we're all doing it this way now.
Indeed, we're doing it this way, and well, we're looking forward to an incredible live stream tomorrow as well, which has been organized by Yuri Night, LA. I mean, Loretta, can you walk us through a bit of what's happening tomorrow that we're all looking forward to watching, and possibly brewing a few coffees as well?
Yeah, it's going to be a late night for you. We're really excited to put together this extraordinary event on really short notice. But luckily, so many people stepped forward and want to be a part of it. So we've got Commander Chris Hadfield from Canada, who did the David Bowie cover of Space Oddity from the International Space Station, which is extraordinary. He'll be talking to us about isolation and you know, how to take care of yourself right now. We have Nicole Stodd, who's flew to the International Space Station as well, and is an artist and talks about how Earth is a planet, and we're all on it. And then we have Commander Kelly, who spent almost a year on Space Station sitting down with Bob Weir from the Grateful Dead, because apparently Bob Kelly is a big Deadhead. So he just thought it'd be cool to like geek out with Bob Weir. So we're like, yeah, we want to watch you geek out with Bob Weir. So they're on. You know, we have Bill Nye coming in, Seo-Yun Yi from you know, the Korean astronaut who went to International Space Station, as well as Katie Coleman. And we're giving the Spirit of Yuri's Night Award this year to Duran Duran for their amazing concert they did for the Apollo 11 50th last July at Kennedy Space Center. And so Nick Rhodes will also sends us be also on to accept on behalf of the band the Spirit of Yuri's Night Award. So we're super excited.
Well, I mean,
so there's another moment of being old, because I saw them on one of their very first tours, but that's, you know, how long have they been playing now? Come on.
I was a big Duran Duran fan. Yeah, my sister snuck backstage at one of the shows once. I was super jealous.
Yeah. Well, no one's going to object to that at Space Rock, certainly. That sounds absolutely phenomenal, certainly. But I guess it's the thing, though, isn't it? It's not just about the event itself, right? You know, just Yuri going into space. It's what Yuri Gagarin's you know, achievement, you know, signifies to kind of, I guess, you know, usher in this incredible space age that we're in. And what I love about the way that you've defined it all is it's not just about the past, but also what's next, what the future is for space exploration. And I guess that's really where I want to kind of start the discussion here, because there's so many exciting things happening here. And that's very much the inception of Space Rocks as well, because there's so much to keep up with. How do you parse it, and how do you kind of keep track of all the things that are happening? I mean, Mark, I kind of want to start with you. And what are the next big steps from your perspective? What are the things that have to happen that we can look forward to happening in our lifetimes?
Wow. Well, that's the major scope. I mean, at some level, we're trying to focus on the near term. We just had a couple of launches, as you know, in the last few months. We launched our KOPS exoplanet satellite back in December, and then in February, middle of February, we launched with NASA a collaboration called Solar Orbiter, which is on its way to be actually inside the orbit of Mercury and observing the sun, not only close up, but actually from high latitude as well, looking down on the poles of the sun for the very first time. So there's a lot of science to come from those missions. We're all very anxious to get James Webb Space Telescope completed and launched. And of course, COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis is affecting all of these missions in slowing things down. So there's a sort of a sense, you know, let's get this over with, but got to keep people safe first. That's the main thing. You know, let's find the right solution to this. The universe isn't going away. It's going to be there. It's going to be waiting for us when we can sort of turn our attention back that way. Some things, on the other hand, can't wait so readily. So there's Bepi Colombo flyby this morning at 6:30 our time. You know, that had to happen when it had to happen. So people had to go into work this morning with all the precautions necessary, socially distancing across the room, and you know, making sure that everybody had their own keyboard, which they brought in, and they weren't allowed to share keyboards. All these kinds of precautions. But as we look forward now, we've got missions which, in order to launch them and fly them effectively, they have to fly on time. So we have a mission called JUICE, going to Jupiter and the icy moons of Jupiter and ending up in orbit around Ganymede. And if that doesn't launch on time in 2022, it means we miss the window. We miss the gravity assist we need to get there effectively. So people are still working hard on that one, while others, you know, if they launch a few months late, okay, you know, it's not ideal, but we can live with that. But so that's kind of very near term, but we're already planning a thing called Voyage 2050. I mean, and that's the sort of time scale where we're looking strategically on missions which need to be thought about now, so that we can get the technology developed, we can get the science developed to the point where you can say, well, this is, you know, this is the better science versus that science. We have competition. There's way too many good ideas for us to do them all. So there's a lot of work going on right now on defining the kinds of missions that will be, well, I mean, even Harriet will be, you know, on the borderline of one of the old guard at that point, right? I mean, you know, she'll be, I mean, I'm, you know, you and me, man, we're gone, but, you know, so we're already planning things, not for the people who are young and active in the space industry today, but for their future students. And those are the sorts of things we have to do. Now, it's hard sometimes to know exactly where science is going, because it's dynamic. And if you look at what the Hubble Space Telescope spends a lot of its time doing today, is looking at exoplanets, looking at planets going around other stars, measuring their atmospheres. And it was never planned for that. They didn't exist at that time, right? Nobody had discovered any at the time Hubble was launched nearly 30 years ago. And people who've been working on that field recently, you know, they've been very successful in getting observing time to study those objects. And so there's a sort of actually a presumption of arrogance on one hand that we can even think what the science will be in 2050. And yet, you know, if you don't start now, you won't have the technology, you won't have the basis ready to actually be able to go and enable that science. But I will tell you the one mission which sort of links this all together for me, we're talking about Yuri Gagarin launching in 1961. In 2061, that would have been his 100th birthday, the 100th anniversary and my 100th birthday. And the thing I want to be alive for that. So I want to get past this crisis. You know, I want to have a good life from now on and survive till 2061, because what happens in 2061 is the return of Halley's Comet. It comes back again. Of course, I saw it in 1986, lucky enough to see it then. And actually, when I was a student at the time, and we had the telescope in Edinburgh looking up at the sky, looking at Halley, it wasn't a very good passage. It wasn't very close to the Earth. So you could see it through telescopes. You could just about, you know, make it out. But there was somebody there at that point who had seen it as a child in 1910. So that link, that intergenerational link from 1910, if I can hand off to somebody in 2061 who sees it then, and I can show it to them, and they're a kid, then they could see it another 76 years later. And imagine that span through me, 1910 to the 22nd century, right? And the thing I want to do in 2061, or at least I want Harriet and her guys to do this, is launch a mission like Rosetta to Halley. It's incredibly difficult because Halley comes in very fast. In 1986, of course, we flew past it with the Giotto mission. We had that very brief encounter. What I want you guys to do is to have a rendezvous mission with power systems on board that can then fly with Halley for an entire circuit, 76 years out and back again, to connect the generations. It's nuts, it's bonkers, but you know, why not? Why not do this in 2061? Fly to Halley and rendezvous with it and come back a whole generation, or 3 generations later.
Yeah, over to you, Harriet.
Yeah, no pressure. I'll get working on it now.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing it. Well, I mean, well, this is the interesting thing, though, and I think that Space Rocks is very much an embodiment of, I think, a similar DNA, you know, that Yuri Night represents, because so much of it is, you know, beyond the science, you know, and as Mark and I, you know, have long conversations, you know, the Rosetta mission is a great one to mention, of course, because, of course, that wasn't just the science, it also inspired a record by Vangelis, you know, about the very subject. Space science goes so far beyond the science that it creates, it's also the culture that it inspires as well. And Loretta, it feels like that's what Yuri's Night is also all about, is that it's not just the science, but also the cultural significance, and something that we can all celebrate regardless of how we feel about the data itself.
Yeah, like Space Rocks, we think that bringing in the artists and the musicians with the scientists and engineers to help us tell our story in a compelling way that, you know, conveys better to the public, you know, benefits everybody. And it's fun because the musicians and the artists love space as much as we do. So getting to play with us, you know, they are always thrilled to do it. So it's a lot of fun.
I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think space captures people's imagination the way it is? Because you've worked with so many people over the years in creating this event. You know, why do you think it resonates? Why do you think it sparks this love that so many people feel?
I think it's just natural for a certain part of the population to have that explorer gene. You know, it biologically makes sense. You need some people in society to hold down the home front and tend the home fires. And you need some segment of society that's always pushing the boundary, always exploring, always looking for what's next, trying to find, you know, to be able to bring that back to their society and their culture and take care and find the new watering hole or the new food source. And so those of us who inherited that explorer gene from the early explorers and sailors and mountaineers, you know, we feel that same need to push the boundary of human potential for our species. So that's our role in society. That's our job. And I feel like that's one of the things I love about our community is that we have this something that binds us all together. We're all driven the same way. And it makes our community really tight, and that we have all that in common. And I think that's a really compelling feature that inspires us to be bigger than ourselves. And I think that's what is so great about it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I mean, you mentioned, you know, what Yuri's Night will signify in 10,000 years from now, perhaps, you know, and I mean, definitely there's much about what Mark was saying that sort of has a lot to do with setting the stage now for what's going to happen in 2050, for instance. You know, something that forces us to think about things beyond our own lifespans, perhaps, to really kind of plan. So it really is a more species-like approach to things than one by simple nationality, one that's beyond simple personal interest. But, you know, there's another dimension to this as well. And I want to bring Harriet into this because we've talked about art, we talked about the science, but Harriet, you have a fascinating background because, of course, as the founder of the London Space Network, you do so much to deal with the side that so much of space has much to do with these days, commerce as well.
Yeah, so me and a couple of other folks, shout out to Mani Shah and Nish Sharma, founded the London Space Network about a year ago now. And the idea was to bring together the kind of London space community. Everything was a little bit disjointed, right? And we're like, okay, let's find one place where we can sit in a pub, have a beer, and, you know, get to know people who work in, you know, universities or work in industry or work in the space agency, you know, all these different things. And it's been so encouraging to see how many people, you know, want to kind of get together and build those links across the space community. Because like you say, you know, it takes people who are space scientists or people have an interest in, you know, creating space art or poetry or music. But there's also a business side to this, right? Space gives us so much in terms of our everyday life that I think we take for granted. You know, we rely on satellites that are orbiting the Earth for a whole host of different services, whether it is disaster monitoring or navigation, communications, all these kind of things. So there's a thriving commercial space industry as well that kind of comes together. So it's when I think about the space community, it's not so much, you know, one thing. It's more like a platform, right, that sits across so many different areas. And I think that's what makes it really exciting, is because you can have that passion for space, but pursue it in a whole different range of ways. And that's really exciting. You know, it doesn't put you in a box in terms of one particular thing. It kind of almost opens up this whole new world of things you can explore, which is awesome.
Can I just pick up on that? Because, you know, one of the things that preoccupies me a little bit these days is, I mean, particularly perhaps in the current environment where we're sort of being forced a little bit to reappraise the way we live our lives and you know, how we relate to each other and how we will relate to each other after this is all over. I do a bit of I mean, this will sound a bit negative, but you know, bear with me. I do a little bit of a mental experiment where I walk down a busy street, you know, Oxford Street in London, or even here where I live in the Netherlands, or in Berlin, or somewhere like that, and look people in the eye as you walk down the street and actually ask, do they care about space? Now, you can ask them if you want physically, but you can just look at them. And this isn't judgmental at all. I don't mean in that sense. It's just, there's the danger that space becomes a bit of a geek self-reflection community. And a lot of the dialogue about, you know, exploring and taking human beings to other planets and colonizing the rest of the solar system. I think within our community, sometimes we lose track of the fact that that's pretty elitist, or it certainly can look elitist. It can look like, you know, if you've got enough time and money to think about that, the rest of your life is pretty good, right? Everything else is pretty much sorted. And so I'm very interested in what you guys are both doing and how you're thinking about this in terms of accessibility, diversity, engagement outside of the bubble, because we all love being in the bubble and everybody's, you know, nice and shiny and we're happy and we're doing this event, you know, Yuri's Night, Space Rocks, and you know, we're as guilty of this. But there's a whole world out there which either very neutrally don't care, even though they use the services, but at worst can look at us and say, you guys are just indulging yourselves. You know, I've got real problems to deal with in the world. You know, where does space fit into that? And I'm not saying it has to, but how do we deal with that? That we might look a bit, you know, removed, right? I can talk, we're going to Mercury. It's like, so what, really? I mean, haven't you got better stuff to do? So, you know, to be provocative, how do the pair of you think about that and within the context of what you do?
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, because at the start of my career, I actually spent 4 years working in a bank before I came into the space industry, largely for that reason, that the space community to me seemed like this amazing far off thing where, you know, cool, more intelligent people than me spent their time, you know, going into space and doing these amazing things. And I thought, well, you know, I'm not really the biggest fan of flying. I don't think I'm going to be an astronaut. What can I do with space? You know, what does it mean to me? And it took a fair bit of time to realize that actually the space community is so much broader than, you know, one particular career path, right? So I think there's a key education piece that we need to do as a space community to you know, share the value of what space brings to people in their everyday lives, and also to make it more relevant to people, right? And I think that's what's so fantastic about organizations like Space Rocks and Yuri's Night is it's not just preaching to the choir, right? You're bringing that space energy and community to a whole new audience of people who like music, or, you know, who like going to fun parties in LA under a space shuttle, or, you know, all these different things. And I think that's something that's really cool.
And I think it can be really directly relevant. And that's an important story to tell as well. Like that we found the finding of the ozone hole in the 80s, you know, by satellite data, and really seeing that's something that impacts people in their daily lives, you know, in Australia who are getting skin cancer. And, you know, the scientists who are doing that research, you know, it's blue sky research, but it immediately had an impact on everyday life. And we banned CFCs and the ozone hole recovered remarkably quickly. And so, you know, we don't know what could come out of what we're doing. I mean, when Carl Sagan was doing the comparative planetology and looking at why is Venus so hot, you know, that's where we came up with the concept of a greenhouse gas and the greenhouse effect. And that's where we started to understand what's happening on our own planet with climate change. And so, you know, just learn to appreciate that sometimes this basic science has really profound impacts on everyday life, like electricity and penicillin. You know, these things, we may not understand why we're driven to do it, but, you know, it does have really powerful paybacks for society that we maybe can't foresee, but I know are out there, and that's part of why we're called to go.
I'm just going to, you know, go a bit further on that, because I mean, I completely agree with what you both said, right? I mean, it's clear that we have to demonstrate that there's a local relevance to this. Some people might be excited by the picture you have behind you there, you know, the Milky Way. Other people might be excited by saying, look, I can see that crops are growing in this corner of the field better than they're growing in the other corner of the field, right? I mean, there's lots of impacts, but I've been in this business a long time, and I've seen space outreach and space communication and space engagement improve enormously. You know, you can argue some of it goes back to Hubble, when Hubble was launched with the faulty, the mirror, which isn't polished right. There was a huge effort then on kind of playing catch up, because let's be honest, in 1990, NASA was a complete laughing stock. I was working on a Hubble next generation instrument. I mean, you watch Johnny Carson on the television. I mean, he was an astronomy fan, right? But there were others that some of the op-eds and some of the cartoons were shockingly negative about what the disaster that had happened. So a lot of effort went into recovering from that. We've done brilliant outreach, I think, over the years. And yet we're in a world where we're becoming even more polarized between the people who get it and the people who don't. And again, that's not judgmental. It's just, you know, people who are engaged in the science and evidence-based policy and the rational ways of and we see it with COVID-19, right? We see different countries having very different approaches to how we communicate with the public about where the dangers are and what the actions will be. And so my slight concern is that although, again, in our bubble, we've got better and better at this, the polarization in society between science and whatever the other word is, non-science, faith, demagoguery, it's getting wider. And I feel, because at least for me, I work for a space agency that is paid for by everybody. All the taxpayers pay my salary and for all these satellites. So I can't just ignore all of them, right? I mean, there may be reasons I don't want to, because if they're going to vote for things which endanger my life, I want to, but they've paid for what I do. So I'm still really interested in this idea about, bridging that gap, right? Because even if you tell them it's good for you, they might not want to know, because there's the whole educational aspect, right? Which starts very young and demonstrating that these things have value. So how does Yuri's Night reach out beyond that kind of the event? Are there long-term programs where you're engaged in education and outreach? So you're kind of really reaching it, because there's lots of places in Los Angeles which are really poor. How do you get into those places, right? And start young?
We do have a partnership with the Columbia Space Center in Los Angeles. It's one of the Challenger Learning Centers network, and that was created after the Challenger accident in the 80s. And they have a fabulous Yuri's Night Kids event where they get thousands of kids from around LA who come through there and get to do hands-on experiences in their facility and talk with young scientists and engineers who work on space missions and really capture their imagination at a young age.
Are they self-selecting? I mean, this is, again, I'm kind of airing some of our dirty laundry in public here, because everybody, people are listening in. Space Rocks is a little bit, again, it's a bit of the in crowd, people who know they like space and their kids come along. But you may know, and Alex and I, we worked in the last Space Rocks event with Dominique Tipper, who is Naomi Nagata in The Expanse. She came along to the event and was, just brilliant for who she is, but she's very engaged in the whole issue of realizing that she comes from a single mother family, person of color in the East End of London. And the fact that she was told when she was young that you could not be a space scientist, you could not be an astronaut, you could, so young, saying that's not the world for you. And so again, our audience is self-selecting. How do we reach out to people who would not come anyway? Not forcing them to come, not saying you will now come and sit and listen to a bunch of people, because that doesn't work either, right? And that's really what I want Space Rocks to be. Working with Naomi and Dominique and others, and people who are outside of my bubble, and they know a world that I just don't know. How do I get to them, right? And that's a huge challenge for me personally. And I'd be, would love to work with you guys on how to get outside of the space bubble.
So I can speak to a couple of things that happened at Caltech in the US, which I thought were really cool initiatives. One which was called Sidewalk Astronomy. So that might need an English equivalent translation. But it was basically what would happen is astronomers would set up a telescope on the corner of a block, and that was it. And people would walk past and say, what are you guys doing? And they'd say, hey, do you want to check out the moon? And people would really love it, right? And that's where you get people that wouldn't necessarily engage otherwise, right? Because you're just walking down the street and you stumble on it by chance, and then you're talking to someone about the moon, and that can be a really defining point. I remember the first time I saw the rings of Saturn through a telescope. That's huge, right? That is something where you can think, and so many people have that. One of those moments like that, be it a teacher or someone in your family or a book you read, that kind of spark that really ignites your imagination. And so I think maybe finding innovative ways like that to reach people you wouldn't might otherwise do so is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do a Space Rocks on tour.
One of my favorite success stories, Mark, is there's a animated series for kids on the Disney Channel here in well, I guess it's all around the world. Disney's all around the world.
Oh yes.
It's called Miles from Tomorrowland. I think it has different names in different languages, but it's sort of a Jetsons-esque family, spaceship traveling around the world, the universe, solving problems. And they did a whole episode about Yuri's Night, which I just was delighted about. And so, that's, beaming into, homes in, countries around the planet. Your parents don't have to be interested in space. You can just tune in and, get to watch, this show about, young kids solving, space mysteries, going to Mars, going to, hanging out with Bill Nye, hanging out with ISS astronauts, you know, when they go travel back in time, because obviously they're far in the future. And it was just a lot of fun.
Cool. I mean, I think one of the things which I've at least not, if not fully learned, but I'm becoming aware of, different things work for different people always, right? I mean, one experience I remember, it must have been in 2009, right? Because it was the International Year of Astronomy, 2009, is that right, as I recall? And I was still, just before I moved here, I was still living in the UK, and we had events on campus at the University of Exeter where I was teaching. And we bought a whole bunch of meteorites from, you probably come across him, Jeff Notkin, Meteorite Man.
Yeah.
He's a Brit based in Arizona. And I bought a whole bunch of small Sikoti-Arlin metal asteroid remnants, if you like, so small meteorites. And we would give them to people when they came to events. They cost, you know, €1 each, £1 each. Half the people kind of took them and were just instantly stunned by that this was a thing, that something could fall from outer space that's that old, and look at it. The rest kind of went, it's a rock. They didn't exactly throw it away in public, but you know it's somewhere in the back of a drawer somewhere now. But for me, the strangest experience was what we also got from Jeff. He gave us, we bought a big iron meteorite, a large one, as a thing to hand around. And Jeff also put in the package a stone chondrite. And if you've ever come across chondrites, they don't look like anything. They look like a rock. They just, because they're not metal, they don't kind of look different to things you'd find on the ground. And this had been found in Northwest Africa some years ago. And it's very anonymous, but they're actually older than the metal ones because they are original things from the birth of the solar system, whereas the metal ones formed inside kind of asteroid objects and then got broken up later and get spread around. So I put this in the hand of this friend of mine. He was a neighbor. He had almost a kind of spiritual epiphany. It was quite something. And I looked at him, he was almost crying. And he said, because I had explained to him, this was 4.5 billion years old, older than the planet that you're standing on. And of course, for us, that's what meteorites are. He just had not appreciated you could have such a thing in your own hand. And I had to buy him one. His wife said, can you get me one? Because, you know, he's not going to forget this. And they don't cost that much, right? They're not that precious until you think about what they are. So again, I think you can reach people in different ways. The sidewalk astronomy, you know, TV series, cartoons, music. And I just think, you know, the more we at least look outside of our norms and the way we think about things, that we need to reach everybody in the end somehow. Not that they will be interested necessarily. They can walk away. You don't all have to like music. You don't all have to like this. But at least on me, it's incumbent that we get out of the bubble. So anyway, that's my hobby horse for the evening. But I know you guys are, you know, keen on this too.
Well, you know, it's interesting, you know, because you know, a name that has surfaced, you know, for two different reasons. Well, I guess by, you know, Harriet's background, and Loretta mentioned him, is you know, I think a person whose commitment to outreach looms so broadly over so much of science communication. And of course, that's Carl Sagan, you know, a person who also spoke so eloquently toward the point that you're making, Mark, you know, even in our current pandemic scenario, where there seems to be this polarity between people who trust the experts and people who don't, you know, something that he addressed so well in The Demon Haunted World. I mean, you know, not to digress too far, but what did Carl Sagan mean to each of you individually? Because I can say personally, I can't think of a person that is probably more influential to my outlook than his ways of thinking.
Harriet, you're right there. You're in Sagan land right there in that picture.
I'm literally living in it, right? Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, Carl Sagan has been hugely inspiring because I remember reading Contact, and just the way he described this wonder of the cosmos, like this just awe of the fact that the universe is so big, which should make us feel so small and insignificant, and yet at the same time it makes us so special that we get to live in this, you know, this crazy universe. It was like, you know, someone was speaking to me in a way that someone had got my brain cells, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, this person gets how I'm feeling. This is amazing. And the way he communicates is just so powerful. you know, be it through fiction like Contact or through non-fiction. One of the wonderful things that's come out of the coronavirus, if we can, you know, think about the positive sides, is a good friend of mine has set up a Carl Sagan book club. So we're now all reading The Pale Blue Dot, you know, and kind of every weekend we'll discuss some of the chapters. And it's just so nice to kind of revisit that and, you know, be reminded of just the incredible you know, wonder of the universe and what it can mean to people. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Very good answer. Loretta?
I love Carl Sagan's original Cosmos series. I think it's fantastic storytelling and just a great way to teach about history and that bigger picture and the science. It's just all woven into an incredible I would say spiritual package. And I think, you know, it's a great way to show the wonder of the cosmos. And I think if anyone hasn't seen all 13 or 14 episodes of that, you know, they should definitely check that out. And then there's also this, one of my favorite pieces with Carl Sagan is called The Frontier is Everywhere. It's a 3-minute piece on YouTube that Reed Gower, a Canadian artist, did. Set it to music and imagery, and it's always something I watch when I need to pick me up. And I watched it this week during the coronavirus lockdown, and it had a extra special poignance where he talks about, like, he says it will not be we who explore the stars. It'll be a species very much like us, with more of our strengths and fewer of our weaknesses. And he says, because, you know, the passage of so much time will have changed us. And he says, necessity will have changed us. And it always was a sort of a throwaway line for me before. But right now I really got, like, necessity is changing us. And there's this incredible, it struck me that this is that moment he's talking about, where we're, as a species, preparing and training for our destiny.
It reminds me a little bit also of the film that was made. I'm going to misremember the name of the guy. I think Eric Vernquist, I think, a couple of years ago, made a film called Wanderers, which is set to one of Carl's beautiful speeches, which is very much along that lines, which is, it may not be us that does it. It may not be tomorrow, but that at some point in the future, we will be out there. But it's all very contingent. I mean, it's not a kind of, you know, it's an inevitability, it's a destiny. It's a sense that we can, as long as we develop the right way as a species as well. It's not something where we can go and leave everything else behind. We have to change before we do this. And I think that's a very powerful message, which suffused his politics as well. And the way he talked about, I mean, he was often on Johnny Carson and things like that. He was much more than space. He was kind of a preeminent scientist of his day. In a public relations way. He was a poet as well. I mean, clearly some of his writing was just beautiful. And it also went beautifully with the way that he spoke. I mean, his intonation and his phrasing was wonderful. But on Cosmos, the lovely thing for me was, of course, the music in the original series was done by Vangelis. And so we've had the great privilege now of meeting him and working with him on things linked to our space missions. And so there's nothing weirder than being in a room with Vangelis playing a bit of Cosmos and then thinking back to seeing it as a young person. But for me, the thing Alex picked, you mentioned it, and it's really, anybody listening, if you haven't read it, go out and read The Demon Haunted World, because that is a book which it's not really about space or the universe at all. It's about how evidence and how rational thinking is utterly vital to the way that we run our lives. There's an awful lot in there, for example, about witchcraft and the mass hysteria around witchcraft 300-400 years ago, and how that has so many parallels with the alien abduction crisis. You know, the sense that in the 1950s and 60s that aliens were going to, you know, take us away, and the way that human beings can be drawn into mass hysteria and not focus on the evidence and not focus on the rational side is beautifully illustrated in that book. And I know Dallas Campbell, a good friend of ours in Space Rocks, that his favorite book, he always picks it out when I do TV interviews. It's on the shelf behind me. It's like, you've still got The Demon Haunted World there. One of the best books I've ever read, and I'm going to read it again during this holiday.
Indeed. Well, I think an incredibly prescient book, but also I think just a wonderful statement about how many lives Carl Sagan continues to touch. Which I guess is so much of what space rocks and indeed what makes Yuri's Night so wonderful, because it's about bringing people together. Now, we're gonna shift focus just a little bit now, because we're coming up to time for questions from the audience who've been very patiently giving us their questions. So thanks very much, everyone, for what do you say, tuning in, live streaming in, turning on your broadband. Yeah, well, we've got a great question from ISS Above, who asked, I think, a really important question, something that might speak to what we're doing here today. During this pandemic, what are the approaches we can all do to support the ongoing outreach outside of the quote unquote space nerd community? What should we be doing? What do you think? Loretta?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think hosting more online events. I've seen, I know a lot of science communicators are doing live streams like this during the school day to help kids connect with real people who can make science engaging and fun, if they don't have those resources directly around them. Otherwise, that's something that all of us can do. And I think, I was gonna say, yeah, sidewalk astronomy is harder to do when we're in social isolation. Darn it. But you could live stream your feed from your telescope and let people, it's not the same as letting the photon from Saturn actually touch your eyes. The last thing it touched was the ring of Saturn, and then it hits your retina. That's a nice moment. Let's see, what else could you do? Yeah, just I think the messaging that we have as a community is really profound and powerful right now. The idea of that just because we're separate, and the messaging of like we all are sharing spaceship Earth. It's no more. It's really palpable right now that we live on a spaceship, because there's not all the distractions of a hubbub of life. We're just home, and things are just trying to get still. And also, I think one of the things that's really profoundly connects our community is I feel like astronauts don't take air and water and gravity for granted. We appreciate every drop of water on the space station is precious. Oxygen is precious. You'd never take oxygen for granted on a space mission. You don't take gravity. Is really complicated. We have to design for it and plan for it. So sharing with the world, like just how to appreciate and have gratitude for how blessed we are on this planet, have abundant free oxygen and pressure and temperature and gravity, like that, and just having us appreciate, we may not be able to go to the cinema, but we can breathe, and that's pretty spectacular.
Very good. We have another question from Anushka. As space professionals, what's been your biggest highlight to date? Why don't we start with Harriet?
Biggest highlight to date? Oh gosh. Yeah, okay, I have a highlight. So I was lucky enough to go to Hawaii and work with the Keck telescope, which is this ginormous, one of the largest optical telescopes in the world, on the top of Mauna Kea, to do some observations of Europa. And that still sounds incredible to me, that I could go to an incredibly beautiful island and go and visit a telescope in the most incredible location and spend the night literally, looking at Jupiter and trying to find the right moons and make sure that we were focusing on Europa and not Io or one of the others, and then get the data in and actually do something with it. Like it was just a surreal experience to be able to be part of that process, that was pretty cool.
Very good. And yourself, Loretta?
I also had the privilege of working for Zero Gravity Corporation. We have a 727. We do parabolic flights where you experience floating weightless. And so, I've got to do that 80 flights with them as a flight attendant, flight director. And I think the experience of just being able to float weightless in the cabin is unbeatable.
Fantastic. So, if I'm not mistaken, that's what's called a vomit comet, right? Do you care to tell us if that's true, or is that just a myth?
Alex, it's a myth. No. So the vomit comet is the nickname for NASA's plane, And the difference is that because they're government funded and they're trying to get the maximum research time per dollar, they do, and I've done some NASA flights, they're pretty demanding. We do 40 parabolas back to back, and then we turn around and go home and maybe do more on the way home. It's very difficult. Like it took everything I had to do a NASA flight. The flights we do with the public, we do, you know, a lunar parabola, some Martian parabolas, or Martian parabolas, anyway, and then we do some we do 12 zeros, and we take breaks in between. So it's a lot more a customer focused experience. And yeah, people do get sick. I'm very susceptible to motion sickness. So I have to be really careful of how I manage myself on the plane. But knock on wood, I've yet to throw up on the plane.
It sounds like a lot of fun. And Mark, what's your career highlight been then?
Yeah, I'm old. Lots. Yeah, just one thing. I can't help but bring this up. So, you know, Harriet mentioned being on Mauna Kea, looking at Jupiter with the Keck. I have lots and lots of history on Mauna Kea. I was actually married on the summit of Mauna Kea. So yeah, on the real summit away from the telescope. So pretty cool. I think we were the first people to be married actually on the summit of Mauna Kea. I have to say that was my first marriage, and we got divorced later, but you know, there was probably nothing to do with the curse of Pele or something like that. But yeah, back in those days when I was on Mauna Kea a lot, the Keck hadn't been built, and there is a smaller telescope on the summit called the NASA Infrared Telescope Facility, which was built in support of the Voyager missions to be able to do simultaneous ground-based observing of the planets as Voyager went out, the two Voyager probes went out through the solar system. And it's still in use, and it gets used for lots of things. And actually, the best man and my fellow PhD student, John Rayner, is now the director of that telescope. But the old story was, you know, back in the days, you know, lots of planetary observing going on. And the telescope operators came up with the phrase that, you know, always people were coming to look at Jupiter. And so the phrase on the summit at that point, kind of privately, was nothing could be stupider than looking up at Jupiter. They all got sick and tired of looking at Jupiter with a telescope. But no, for me, you know, huge career highlight, which as an astronomer is weird, has been involvement in Rosetta. But, you know, that was just such an unbelievable thing to be involved with in my small way as part of a huge team of people. But, you know, personally, the one thing which I've been lucky enough to do is be able to point telescopes. I'm a ground-based astronomer originally. Go to a telescope with a new instrument that you help build, operates in new ways, new wavelengths, new technology, point at a blank piece of sky and discover something, and know that you are the first person in history to see not the photons, because they hit the telescope, got converted into electrons, came down to a computer screen, but you're the first person to see that object in space. Nobody else has ever seen it. I've been lucky enough to discover a number of objects during my career. Some of them, for example, huge outflows of gas moving away at extremely high speeds, thousands of kilometers per second away from young protostars being born right now, baby stars, just a few 100,000 years old, and just take pictures of them at infrared wavelengths. And nobody's ever seen that before. And it's an almost palpable, visceral human sense. A shiver goes down your spine. There's a real moment. And then, you know, then it's all the work of writing it up and so on. But that second where nobody else has ever seen that before, nothing beats that. Well, all right, there are a few things that beat that, but professionally, nothing beats that. But
it's very good. And well, you know, I got to say, I've got so many things to choose from, certainly, but definitely the highlight for me is meeting you guys. Yeah? Absolutely.
Cheesier, Alex.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we had time for one more question. I think it's a brilliant one. I think it's a perfect expression of what this is all about. We actually have an art studio, you know, who's doing a painting for Yuri's Night, saying what should he or she paint on the next canvas. If you had an artist actually doing a depiction of a celestial object or something, what would you ask them to do?
Oh my gosh, you're spoiling us.
It's the big one. It's the big one. Any ideas?
So I'm really lucky because my dad is, one, a sci-fi nerd, and two, an artist. So every now and then I get to commission him to paint pictures for me. So I'll give an example that I've luckily already got hanging up in my house, but I think it's amazing. Harping back to Carl Sagan, there's this quote in one of his essays where he says, I know a land where there are 4 stars in the sky, 1 yellow, 1 blue, 1 red, 1 white, and they're so close that star stuff flows between them, and it's just this kind of magical, you know, invokes the imagination of this incredible world. And I asked my dad to draw it, paint it for me, and he did, and it's this amazing oil painting of these different stars coming together. So yeah, that's my favorite space picture that I have.
Well, absolutely fantastic. And Mark, how about yourself? What would you choose to commission an artist to do?
I'm a little bit, you know, like Harriet. I actually have a brother who's an artist, and on the odd occasion when I've wanted him to, you know, get something painted, I've asked him, and he's done it, which is cool. Now he asks for money. It doesn't work like that anymore. But wow, what would I want painted? I don't, you know, strangely enough, and this sounds a bit trite. We just flew past the planet Earth today and looked down on it with Bepi Colombo. And actually, off to the side of the screen here that you can't see, I've got some of the raw images that were taken from Bepi Colombo this morning, the raw data on my desktop, and I'm playing with them. We've published some of those images already, but I talked to the project scientists and I have them sitting here, and I'm just kind of looking down at those. And again, reflecting, right? We are able to send our amazing machines into space, and we look outwards, but occasionally they come back and they put everything in context where you can see one of our machines and the Earth in the background. And so I, you know, just today, because it's today and you asked the question, paint me a painting of the Earth seen from space. I think that would be an amazing thing to put, because this is us, this is where we are. You know, we look outwards, but this is where we are. And this is what we have to deal with right now is making the Earth, you know what, a better place, because after this crisis, we're all going to have to think hard about how we actually, you know, relate to each other and to the planet and to the environment and what we live in. So yeah, paint me the Earth today.
Indeed, fantastic.
And it's what Gagarin saw in his 1.5 hour flight around the world, right? And he could see through a hole in the floor and he could see the Earth going past underneath. So what more perfect thing than to paint the Earth, which Yuri flew above and then came back down to again.
A very good answer, and we now have the artist's name. It's Annette Winkler. So Loretta, why don't you finish this off for us? What would you commission an artist to depict on a canvas?
Yeah, I definitely love the limb of the Earth, the thin atmosphere, and a little Vostok 1 capsule above it that Yuri flew in. Sort of baby's first footsteps, humanity's first step out into the cosmos.
What a fantastic answer. Well, I guess that's all the time that we have for Uplink 02, our Yuri's Night special. Can I say on behalf of everyone at Space Rocks, Harriet and Loretta, what an absolute pleasure it's been to have you here. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, please go ahead, Loretta.
Well, I just want to make sure that everyone knows tomorrow, go to webcast.yurisnight.net if you want to stay up late and see some astronauts and have some fun with us. And also we just got notice this morning that Antarctica is hosting their Yuri's Night party this year. They're saying that they have space-themed drinks, spacey music, free admittance, free parking, no social distancing required. Party on Antarctica.
Yeah. Now that's got to be some kind of record, huh? Absolutely fantastic. Yuri's Night.
And the one little tradition, if we haven't really started it, we kind of did at the end of the last one. I just thought, well, why don't we get all of our guests, you know, the way we do Space Rocks, you know, Yuri's Night is happening tomorrow, but for Space Rocks, we sign off with kind of a 2-part emoji. So space is the Vulcan salute, and then rocks is the horn. So we need Space Rocks, okay? So thank you very much, everybody, for taking part.
Very good.
And all success tomorrow. We really hope it goes well. So yeah, if you can do the Vulcan one quickly, the other one's easier. Yeah.
Indeed, we will be watching, and thanks to everybody who tuned in as well. Thanks so much for your time, everyone.
Great.
Thank you.
Alex.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
First to you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.